But so I wouldn't put a lot of stock in, somebody like, Dan Brown or even this guy Moore saying, I hated it. That could be a lot of, hype as well.
Yeah, it could be, absolutely. Who knows?
You never know. You really got to know more personal details about it.
Sure. And in the end, I mean, that doesn't matter because it's the message of the movie.
It's kind of unlikely, isn't it? I mean, the director, when you're commissioned to do a story like this, you have a lot of say in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working with a scriptwriter, you pretty know much what the movie's going to be. So I'm very suspicious that later on, just after the real shooting starts, that it could diverge so far from your script and your storyboard that you might not like it in the end and want to take your name off it. I mean, writers are pretty much involved a lot right up to the moments when the cameras start rolling.
Yeah.
And many writers have even said, hey, I want a cameo in the movie. My agent has said, not only have I written the script or co-write the script and have all the rights of the script, but I want even a little cameo in the movie, and many studios have even done that.
Yeah.
So that you do have a lot of rights, and you do have a lot of legal protection.
Yeah.
So later on when I hear about this kind of thing, where I had to withdraw my name because I just hated the way it came out, that can only happen if, you've lapsed in your rights, and they've literally made a movie absolutely without you. Right? Like, the rights of your script has lapsed.
Yeah. And
some studio has taken your idea. This happened with Robert Crumb, the great American cartoonist. He had no money, so he'd create all these incredible things like Felix the Cat and whatever. And the next thing you know, some Disney had made a whole cartoon. His name's not on it. It's got nothing to do with him. And then people still going, I hated that Felix the Cat cartoon that Disney made, man. You shouldn't have ever done that. He turns around going, well, I was not even involved in it. What are you blaming me for?
Yeah.
So, again, we've got that. So, yes, obviously a person can say, I hated that movie that was made of my book or my name. Christopher Tolkien basically gave the kudos to, Peter Jackson and said, yes, our family support your script and what you've done, because they have total rights. He could not have made that movie without the Tolkien family say so. And they totally were behind the film. So, in that case, everything went well. But if you've been involved in it, you've got the rights.
Sure.
That's a different story.
It is, yeah. So, beyond that, do you want to say something more about V, or want to move on to Fight Club?
It's there's so many elements to that movie. We'd spend the whole hour just talking about it.
Yeah.
It's very deep. I want people to really go and look at it as a psychological drama. That it's based on this person finding their identity. There's a lot of in movies. There's a lot of missed fathers. Fathers that are missing. You get this in the Fight Club, where there's a whole. The movie can almost be entirely analyzed from the point of view in Fight Club of the missing father.
Yeah,
you definitely got that in Hellboy. You've definitely got that in V for Vendetta. So if you come to it from a female point of view or feminine psychology point of view, then the movie is very, very interesting about the interplay of the archetypes. And again, we'd spend the whole hour getting into that, so people need to listen back to our shows on that or on The Outsider and the whole concept of authentic life.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And how you break from that. And that breaking from the inauthentic life, just like we were saying with the prisoner, the prisoner tries to escape. I think that's a very, very profound story of escape, not just from family and not just from the normal programming, but from totally the whole corporeal matrix. And that's where the big ball comes in, Rover. Because Rover in the prisoner, the big ball, a lot of people have been, speculating what that really represents. To me, rover is made of two words, row over, right? And rowing over or going past brings up a lot of fear. So to me, rover is fear. So when people are watching, in fact, when rover ever appears, it always appears when there is an emotion of fear. Now, McGowan never explained what rover was because he wanted to leave it as a random element in his program. But I believe that rover is human fear. Because anyone who tries to leave the village, right, Rover comes and catches them, right?
Yeah, sure.
But if you look at it in a different way, anybody who tries to leave the village gets prevented from doing so, not by an agency, because Rover is just a big ball, a big balloon. It's almost like he's saying it's not there at all. There's no physical agency, there's no army, there's no barbed wire, but you don't leave the village. It's because you won't walk past it because of your own fear. And Rover, to me, the thing that drags them back or brings them back or accompanies them back like this watchdog is really people's own trepidation and people's fear. You see this picked up in the first scene of Lord of the Rings, where Sam stops at the boundary of Hobbiton. As they're leaving on their great journey, the great mythical journey, he literally stops and says, and Frodo goes, "Why have you stopped?" And Sam goes, "Because if I move one more step, I'll be further than I've ever been in my life from my home, from my village." And, of course, he takes the step, and that is what is powerful about that film. He does take that step. And many people in this world, many millions of people in this world, will not take that step, physically and more importantly, psychologically. Now, V for Vendetta, you see, reverses back to this, that here you have a society, just like the village, in which there is no chance of physical escape. It's wall to wall. It's just, a Blade Runner existence. Absolutely left has met right, right has met left, east has met west, and west has met east. There is no escape in this particular, penitentiary corporate existence, and we're hurtling towards that now in our own world.
Yeah.
However, the message of V for Vendetta is: are you free in your mind? Because that's where real freedom is. Don't expect it to ever come collectively. Don't expect it to ever come as some concerted effort. It probably has never happened, and it will not happen, and it certainly will not happen in the large, city, metropoli, corporate environments that we have. So the message of V is very much one of psychological freedom. Psychological freedom, and this is again a key that I really do like about that film.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's a classical theme, I guess, in that sense, kind of going through the dark night of the soul, or whatever you want to call it, and then emerge from that, with a sense of freedom that you have. You have to go through the dark periods in order to get to know yourself and stuff like this.
And that's right. You will project your shadow onto an ambivalent character that enters into your life. And in Hellboy, which I believe is a very superior movie, and that's why it's one of my personal favorites, is that the female figure in that, and it's not only female figures who go through underworld cycles, obviously, that's good for dramatic effect, but of course the men go through it as well, because what we're really talking about here is masculine and feminine processes, and not male and female.
Sure.
Henrik, I have got emails from people saying, we hate the way that you talk so much about the female, and that you're anti-androcentric, you are darning the male energy in a lot of your work. Okay. Literally, I read this because I'm interested in critics.
Yeah, sure.
I read everything my critics say. I don't read it if they're abusive, but if they have criticalness, I will listen to what they say, because it's very, very important. As me as a public figure to, and I'm trying to give a message to the world or whatever, to really listen back to the feedback.
Yeah, sure.
And not a lot, but sometimes I've been hit with that wait a minute, you're talking so much about the goddess and the feminine, female qualities, we don't like it. And I respond back to that going, look, I'm not talking about the female, I'm talking about the feminine.
Exactly. Something we all got.
Yeah, I'm no fan of men and women. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Men are just as bad. Women can just be as masculine and crazed out and as ludicrous as the men.
Sure.
You're all in the same, mess.
Yeah.
Each person projecting their own garbage onto another. What I'm dealing with is fundamental meta themes that go beyond that. And of course, this is, not understandable by a lot of people. So again, I have to emphasize that feminine does not mean female. There's a feminine aspect of the masculine. There's a masculine aspect of the feminine.
Sure.
Of the female.
Yeah.
Of women. And people really need to get into this. Man has breasts. He has nipples, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. There's a female aspect within the male.
Yeah.
Women have body hair.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a clitoris. That's, let's face it, there are aspects of both sexes there. But when you go on to another level higher than that, then you're into the symbolic canon. And that's what these filmmakers are drawing upon, is the symbolic canon. They're not just there to reinforce the prejudices of the street level, local yokel. And in these movies, there's a very deep dialogue about this. Not perhaps as complex as the one in the Mummy movie, the original Mummy we were talking about. Not perhaps as complex as in John Berman's Zardoz, or as complex as you might find in some of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, like Vertigo, or even in Werner Herzog, who I think is an exceptionally complex, has some very complex interactions dealing with the feminine principle. But still, these are movies that are harder to find. Most people are familiar with the bigger movies.
Sure. And
in V for Vendetta, you do find this great interaction with the shadow archetype.
Yeah.
And the woman has the choice then at the end to either project all her anger and hate onto V, who's put her through this terrible ordeal in which she thought she was going to die.
Yeah.
She was imprisoned. There's no reason why she should like that experience. And then when she finally awakens and finds out, oh my God, this was a hallucination, she responds with terrible anger towards him.
Yeah.
That's displaced anger, you see, from the original father, the missing father. And then she transcends, because in effect, she doesn't, in the end, respond or run away or get, off the track.
Sure.
Doesn't rush back to the comfort zone. And that's why that movie succeeds in my eyes as a very transcendent film, one of a kind.
Yeah, yeah.
And in Fight Club, you have the whole critique of the masculine. It's probably one of the most complex movies, that's been made in recent times. Again, I encourage people to go and read the original book, of course. But it's a very transgressive movie, and I like transgressive films, all the way down the line. And transgressive is the opposite, you see, of these conformist kinds of films.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you watch a lot of Alfred Hitchcock movies, you will notice that he did a bit of both, because, again, like any great artist, he was a very ambivalent character. But in a lot of his movies, the status quo is always restored. If people watch the movie The Birds, and they watch it from a psychological point of view, you will find that it's a very pro-establishment, pro-status quo film. And a lot of Alfred Hitchcock, because he worked for major studios and he was sort of himself, I believe, quite, I think he had some very conservative, misogynist, and this is all debatable again, but there's one aspect of looking at Hitchcock's movies that are very establishment pro, if you watch what's really being said subliminally. And then you have these transgressive, directors like Herzog and Wenders and Fassbinder and many others in the West who are not, like that. They're talking about the deconstruction. Well, Fight Club goes to the extreme of saying, look, your whole society is basically in a death, cycle.
On a death row, yeah.
Yeah, and people are not happy anymore. I mean, the prime characters are no longer happy with the roles that they're playing within this framework of what society has given. And that is very common, because that is what's happening now in the world. All this so-called homosexuality and transsexualism that you've been seeing in the world for the last 20 years, that's got nothing to do with sexual proclivity at all.
Yeah.
The whole gay way and all that stuff, what that really has to do with is the fact that subliminally, on a subconscious level, people know that you're in this sort of desert, that God probably doesn't exist, and if God doesn't exist, then heaven probably doesn't exist, and if heaven doesn't exist, probably hell goes with that as well. So all you've got then is the world and other human beings to rule over. But if you really think about it, and this is one of the messages of Fight Club and transgressive movies, it's also a very common theme now in the modern age, is that, wait a minute, if God really doesn't exist, and then you can immediately say that heaven and hell does not exist, then what is there to rule over to feel power? So the Bush people and all of these politicians go, well, we already know that God is dead. We just mouth a lot of Christian jive, but we know, of course, in our hearts that the only way to turn life on and to be living is, and the only way to get your kicks is to rule the world and the people in it as slaves. Then, as I said in the Future of Mankind video, you've got the opposite instinct to that. I'm going to rebel. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be ruled by others, and I don't want to rule others myself. And then comes the transgressive, rebellious aspects. But the thing with that, Henrik, is this. In a situation in which God is dead, see, God always represents the Father, and that's what Fight Club is so much about, is the missing father again. And, of course, if you're a Christian, then, you are absolutely, God is the Father. Your father, you worship your father, you respect your physical father. There's nothing wrong with that. And you also represent the president. All of these father images in the place of that God. But if the father is missing, for some reason, your own physical father, and there's even lines within the Fight Club that talk about the missing father.
Yeah, sure. I remember.
If that father is gone, then you have a psychological response known as antipathy or hatred towards the object of your hate. You have antipathy towards the loss. You blame the father for not being there. Then you blame you blame, and blaming the father then translates into not wanting to be with the system. It brings an antipathy towards order, towards stability, towards structure, and towards any hierarchical organization. And in fact, you become a rebel.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what happens in Fight Club, where the young men become, you see, members of this iconoclastic group that's trying to bring down all established edifices. But the thing is that, and also if you're against the Father or you subliminally rebel against the Father, you also represent rebellion against reason, because reason is one of the attributes, you see, of the animus of the Father. So then you become irrational and Dionysian and, sort of